Hello, history learners! I'm here to share fascinating stories from history in an audio format, perfect for listening while doing chores, studying, or just relaxing with something interesting in the background. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider subscribing for more history content like this. Without further ado, let's travel back to France in 1807 and uncover one of history's strangest and funniest moments, the day Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the greatest military commanders in history, found himself overwhelmed by an unexpected enemy, an army of hungry rabbits. Imagine this. It is the year 1807. Across Europe, the sound of marching armies has barely faded. Entire kingdoms have fallen. Empires are shifting. And at the center of it all stands one man, Napoleon Bonaparte. To some, he is a hero. To others, a tyrant. But to everyone, he is feared. Napoleon has spent years crushing coalition after coalition. Austria, Prussia, Italy, his armies move like a machine. His victories at places like Austerlitz have turned him into something larger than life. At only 38 years old, he controls much of continental Europe. And then, he loses a battle to rabbits. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, actual rabbits. And somehow, the story is real, or at least real enough that historians have repeated it for more than 2 centuries. To understand how this happened, we need to rewind to one of the strangest moments in Napoleonic history. In July of 1807, Napoleon signs what becomes known as the Treaties of Tilsit. After years of brutal conflict, France and Russia temporarily make peace. Europe finally gets a moment to breathe. Napoleon is pleased. His inner circle is relieved. And like many aristocrats of the era, they decide to celebrate with a hunt. Now, hunting in early 19th century Europe was not just a hobby. It was political theater. Royalty hunted. Generals hunted. Nobles hunted. A successful hunt showed power, control, masculinity, and status. So when Napoleon wanted a hunting party, it could not be ordinary. The task of organizing the event fell to his trusted chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier. Berthier was brilliant when it came to military logistics. He helped coordinate some of Napoleon's greatest campaigns. Moving tens of thousands of soldiers across Europe? No problem. But organizing rabbits? That turned out to be much harder. Berthier reportedly arranged for somewhere between several hundred and several thousand rabbits to be collected for the event. The exact number changes depending on the source. Some accounts say 300. Others say 3,000. Either way, there were a lot of rabbits. Too many rabbits. And this is where the disaster begins. Normally, rabbits used for hunts were supposed to be wild. Wild rabbits scatter when released. Hunters chase them on horseback or with dogs. Simple. But gathering thousands of truly wild rabbits on short notice was difficult. So many of the animals used were likely domesticated rabbits or recently captured rabbits that had spent time around humans. That detail would change everything. On the morning of the hunt, Napoleon and his guests arrived expecting entertainment. The fields were prepared. The cages were lined up. Servants stood ready. This was supposed to be elegant, controlled, imperial. Then the cages opened. At first, the rabbits hopped out normally. But instead of fleeing into the countryside, they stopped. The rabbits looked toward the hunting party. And then they charged. Not 1 or 2. Hundreds of them. Possibly thousands. A furry tidal wave surged directly toward the Emperor of France. Napoleon's men were stunned. This was not how rabbits were supposed to behave. The animals crowded around boots and legs. They climbed onto jackets. They pushed forward in waves. Some accounts say the rabbits even leaped onto Napoleon himself. The hunters tried to scare them away. It did not work. They used riding crops. They shouted. They kicked at the ground. Still the rabbits advanced. Why? Because the rabbits were not attacking. They thought they were about to be fed. Domesticated rabbits associated humans with food. And when they saw a crowd of people approaching, they interpreted the situation completely differently from wild animals. To the rabbits, this was not a hunt. It was lunchtime. And so one of the greatest military strategists in human history found himself retreating before an unstoppable army of hungry bunnies. According to later retellings, Napoleon eventually fled into his carriage, while the rabbits continued swarming around him. The image is almost impossible to take seriously. The man who defeated empires, running from rabbits. But that is exactly why the story survived. Historians debate how exaggerated the details became over time. The event itself is widely believed to have happened, but like many historical anecdotes, each retelling added drama. Maybe there were hundreds instead of thousands. Maybe Napoleon was mildly inconvenienced rather than fully routed. Maybe the rabbits were simply clustering around the food baskets nearby. But even cautious historians agree on the basic core of the story. A rabbit hunt organized for Napoleon went disastrously wrong because the rabbits behaved like domesticated animals instead of wild prey. And honestly, that makes the story even better, because history often feels distant and mythological. We imagine legendary figures as statues carved from marble. But moments like this remind us that even the most powerful people in history lived in the real world. A world where plans fail, where logistics collapse, where absurdity appears without warning. Napoleon could command massive armies across Europe, but he could not control hungry rabbits. And strangely enough, this tiny, ridiculous event tells us something important about power itself. No matter how strong someone becomes, there is always something unexpected waiting to humble them. Sometimes it is a rival empire, and sometimes it is bunnies. The story became one of the most famous humorous anecdotes connected to Napoleon's life. It has appeared in historical biographies, collections of strange historical events, and retellings for generations because it perfectly contrasts his terrifying reputation with complete absurdity. And maybe that is why people still love it over 200 years later. Because beneath the crowns, uniforms, and battlefields, history is still full of deeply human moments. Moments where even emperors can look ridiculous. And in 1807, for at least one afternoon, the rabbits won. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this journey into history. Be sure to come back tomorrow for another fascinating story from the past. And if there's a historical topic you'd like to hear about, feel free to leave a suggestion in the comments. Your ideas might inspire a future episode.